Hello there, and welcome to another episode of the StarrCast Podcast, where we talk about all things wellness. And today we have two very excellent guests I'm lucky to get, especially in the summer with kids busy and moms busy running around. But it's a really important topic that we're going to address today that's always on everyone's lips. It's wellness data. So when you look at the wellness industry, and if you've been in beauty, spa, salon, fitness as long as I have, you remember when people used to say, well, this all sounds great, but where are the numbers? And we would sort of look at each other and say, well, we don't really have any numbers because we didn't. And lo and behold, we have numbers now, thanks in large part to these two ladies and the Global Wellness Institute. So I'd like to introduce Ophelia Yeung and Katherine Johnston, both senior research fellows with the Global Wellness Institute, to our podcast today. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you for inviting us.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi there. So Ophelia, I'll start with you. Would you mind giving the listeners just a little background on yourself and how you came to be a senior research fellow, and what does one go to school for, and what drove you to this passion for numbers?
So a little bit about my personal background. I am from Hong Kong, and I came to the United States for college. So I came here when I was 18 as a foreign student, and very quickly I have gotten interested in economics, not just from sort of how to make money for businesses, but really how economics sort of explains how the world works, and how, things within the economy can actually help improve people's lives. So that was my major, economics. And then, I went to Smith College, and then I immediately just dropped into the master's program at Princeton University in public policy and international affairs. And so my degree is actually an MPA, a Master in Public Affairs, and not an MBA, and I'm not in fitness or in the hospitality industry. And so immediately after that, at 24 years old, I joined SRI International as an analyst. And so I spent many years in economic development. That was my career. So I worked all over the world. I mean, people won't believe I've been to Lebanon like 20 times. And I've been to, all over the world in, Africa, South Africa, in Eastern Europe, in Russia. I mean, just doing all kinds of projects that usually either funded by donors or by the local government themselves to develop projects and, to stimulate investment and industry. So I did that for 20 years. And, and then I overlapped with Katherine. Katherine started a little bit after me also at SRI International. But during this time, we work on different industries, look at what industry can be, create jobs in different countries and regions. And tourism was one of the industry that I worked in, and I've developed tourism strategies for many countries and cities and regions. So at some point, about 15 years ago, we were approached by Susie Alice, the famous Susie, Global Spa Summit in New York. And they said, well, we don't have data. And then we're thinking we need data in the spa industry. And then we found your report in the golf industry. So, can you do the same thing? And so Katherine and I were recruited because we were the people in our group who have done more work in the tourism industry. And so we thought, okay, well, let's see how we look at the spa industry. And I can tell you at that time, neither one of us had ever been to a spa. I've never even gotten a massage.
Wow.
I don't know what it is. So it was kind of nice to have a beginner's mind, because that is actually how we approach our projects from then on, because we're not part of the industry. We're studying it from an economist's perspective, but also sort of with an interest in how to make people's life better, not just to help a company make money, because that's not my background. And so, fast forward a few more years, and then every year we started doing a project for the Global Wellness Summit. And then and personally, in my life, in 2015, I had cancer in my parotid gland, which is not, like a very, it wasn't like fatal, as you know. I'm still here, but my children at the time were only in high school, and they were not even in college yet. And then it really kind of shook me up, and I had a pretty serious surgery followed by several months of radiation. And after that, it really kind of, reminded me what is important in my life. And because of the work I've done in the wellness industry, studying one segment at a time. And I remember vividly that year, we were working on workplace wellness and, estimating how big the market was. But at the same time, I was really looking at what work means for wellness and how wellness could be integrated with work. And I found that the work I did with the Global Wellness Institute was the most meaningful to me. And that personally, that is important to me. So it was a good time. 25 years after my career with SRI, I decided to leave. And then, so I only, not completely exclusively, but I spent most of my time working with the Global Wellness Institute.
That's a great story. I mean, it's so interesting that you had, awful that you had cancer, but what an interesting timing that you realize, wow, this impacts a lot of people, this need for this information. So we're lucky to have you. And Katherine, how about you? what was your journey?
Sure. Well, I don't have to go into too many details because the last half of it is very similar to Ophelia's. But, I actually grew up in the Midwest. I ended up on the East Coast for college. I went to grad school at Georgetown in their Foreign Service program, which is a sort of a multidisciplinary international affairs, business, economics, finance type of program, but with an international focus and public policy focus. And coming out of Georgetown, I actually started working at SRI International as an intern with Ophelia in the last year of my program there. And so we've been working together since 1998 and was there until around 2017. And, we did very similar work. We worked together a lot, projects all around the world. And actually, Ophelia, you're wrong. We did go to the spa. we had all these trips to Beirut, Lebanon, as she mentioned, like dozens of them. And we used to go to the spa in Beirut and get Thai massage. Oh, I remember. Because it was our way of relaxing on these crazy business trips.
What was going on in Beirut?
It was a foreign aid funded project by the U.S. Agency for International Development. And we were working on helping to develop small businesses in the rural areas and particular industry sectors. So Ophelia and I were doing tourism development there. Wow. It was a really cool project. And Lebanon's a great place. Although, they've had their ups and downs.
Sure.
But so that was our spa going experience. But, and then we started working with GWI and with Susie at the same time on that first spa industry project in 2008. And, it kind of went from there. And I too left my full-time job or I was working part-time actually. Then I left SRI around 2017, I think. And, similarly, it was time to leave. Things had changed there, and I wanted to do something that was meaningful and fulfilling and also more flexible for my family. And fortunately, that coincided with the time that, GWI and GUS, things were really expanding, and they were needed, people to be dedicated to them doing research. And so it's really been a great for us that instead of doing, this wellness industry research as one of our 25 projects during the year as a consultant, this is our main project, and we've been able to dedicate, we dedicate a whole year to each project. So that really makes the research more robust. It helps our wellness at work. And, it's really enabled us to expand, what we've done with the wellness research.
Well, how wonderful that we were able to get you both who come working together already, into the fold of the wellness world. So you say you were neophytes, shall we say, in wellness and spa. And at the time that you started doing your work for GWI, was it still the Global Spa Summit that it was called at that point?
Yeah,
Yes.
so our first presentation was at the second summit in New York City, which was still the Global Spa Summit. And that's when we presented the global spa economy data, which was pretty groundbreaking to everyone in the industry at the time.
And that was when, like 2007?
2008.
Eight.
Yeah. Right before, right when the recession hit. So, we presented that, and I think that was the only gap in our doing research, was maybe the year after, the 2 years after, because everything crashed and, nobody had money to fund research.
Right.
But then we picked it back up like 2009, 2010, a couple of years later.
Well, kudos to Susie, as always, for seeing the need for us to have reliable data. But data is an amorphous thing, right? I mean, how you slice and dice it can really impact how it's viewed. So I'm interested if you could walk us through, like, okay, you land this project, define wellness in the world. Where do you start? How do you even begin to attack that?
Well, maybe we start with a smaller chunk. When Susie said, "Okay, I see."
Excuse me, Ophelia, let me stop you. Ophelia, would you
We're
mind?
losing a connection.
Ophelia, can you hear us?
I can chat message her.
I'm going to tell her to turn off her camera.
And
We lost her.
All right, she cut out the camera, but the sound's still not working.
We'll wait for her to come back and we'll tell her
Yeah.
to turn off her camera.
Yeah.
It's probably eating up too much bandwidth. And we'll start that segment over. The joys of recording, right?
Yeah.
I live in a very quiet neighborhood, but this week the next door neighbor has had people doing tree trimming for 3 days.
Summertime
They're
stuff,
out
yeah.
there with the truck chipping and sawing away. It's like, oh my word. Hopefully you're not hearing that. Ophelia, we were going to suggest that you turn off your camera.
Yeah, it's off now.
Okay, and you can hear us?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Speak a little bit more.
Can you hear me?
It's a little bit garbled.
It it's garbled for a minute and then it's fine after that. It goes in and out.
Yeah.
Well, let's try that question again. Let me remember where I was.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear any more now?
Yes. Are you ready? Are you speak? Oh, she's talking and I'm not hearing her. Are you hearing her, Katherine?
It's pretty garbled.
You can hear me now.
We can hear you now.
I'm wondering if it's better if I just dial in from my phone.
Yeah, maybe try a cell connection.
Yeah, you want to try that? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, try that.
Sorry.
Okay, should I get off and then just do it from my phone?
Yes, why don't you try that? Hang up here, leave this meeting and dial in and let's see how that works. Is she gone?
Yeah, there she goes. Okay.
So tell me how old's your daughter?
She's 13.
So does she sing, dance, act, all of it?
Sing and act. So yeah, she's a theater obsessed and she's really good.
Yeah, I have a son, same. And he started when he was about 12 and all through high school, all through college.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, she's been doing this, since she was 7, and she needed bigger opportunities than what were available where we live.
So wellness, it's a big word. It's a big world. You two are new to it and you have this project. Oh, can you define it? I mean, how do you start? Like, where did you begin? And secondly, was it helpful to be not in the industry at the moment, but kind of from the outside?
I want to start with the wellness tourism industry. And that was a very challenging one for us. And it's actually even one that we are, in an industry that we're somewhat familiar with, because as I mentioned before, Katherine and I have both done projects in tourism strategy. So we're not completely unfamiliar with it. We're just unfamiliar, less familiar with the wellness part of it. So when we looked at a concept like wellness tourism, and at the time, most people would think of it, the businesses that are the
most interested, of course, would be the destination spas and some that, that have massage or relaxing. But when we kind of took a step back, and we're looking at, when you look at wellness and tourism, and what is really the wellness part of that travel. And so when we really started to investigate, I remember we started looking at the concept of, what kind of consumers are we looking at? Who would and because in the tourism industry, when you want to look at how big it is, you're talking about the number of trips and which trips count as tourism, right? And any trip, maybe 50 miles from your house and maybe more, or it's overnight, or maybe there are definitions like that. Otherwise, I just go to a baseball game. That's not tourism. I eat in my local, it's not tourism. But if I go from Washington to Baltimore, it is tourism because I don't live in Baltimore, right? I mean, so there are definitions first, like what is even tourism spending, right? There's some industry convention that we have to follow. And then when we map wellness to it, so who are those consumers and what makes that trip a tourism trip? So then we, like Katherine has mentioned before, we spend half our time actually defining what it is and what kind of trip would be a wellness trip. And that's where a lot of investigation goes in. And then we actually look like there was a concept that Katherine can talk more about. It's called LOHAS, the lifestyle of the health and sustainability. Yeah. And we were looking like those consumers are kind of like what we're thinking of as wellness tourists, wellness consumers. And so when those wellness consumers go on a trip, what are they looking for? So we start from there. And Katherine, I'll let you continue because you did a lot of work on that definition before we get to the numbers.
Okay.
Yeah. So on the wellness tourism, people had a concept of what they thought it was, that, well, it's people going on yoga retreats and destination spas and going to get a massage and, relax, a girls' weekend, whatever you might have thought that wellness tourism was back then. But we really, thought, well, there's more to it than that. It's not just those people. And so when we started thinking about that consumer base, wellness was really growing in, the consumer sort of mindset and people's interest in it and shaping how they made decisions about what they do, both at home and traveling. And what we realized is, well, yeah, there are people who take trips specifically for wellness purposes. Those are the people going on those retreats and to those spa vacations and so on. But there's a whole other set of consumers who are also being partly or fully driven by wellness when they travel, who are not necessarily doing those activities. And so, what we had to do is say wellness tourism is not just about the activity that they're doing or the place that they're visiting. It's also about their motivation for the trip and what's shaping their decision making. And so that's what we ultimately came up with, is the two-part definition of wellness tourism, that they're the primary wellness travelers, the ones that take a trip specifically for wellness and go to places where they're doing wellness activities. Then the secondary wellness travelers, the ones who could be on any type of trip. They could be on a business trip, visiting friends and family, family vacation, what have you. But, some of their decision making in where they stay or the types of things they do, or say the restaurants they go to, is driven by their wellness interests. Like, oh, I want to go somewhere where I can still eat healthy and maintain my healthy lifestyle habits when I'm away from home. I picked this hotel because it has the best gym. That's another category of wellness tours that people were not thinking about.
No, and I remember when that came out, we were like, oh, this makes so much sense, to have the primary and secondary traveler designations, because it's very true.
And it took us at least 6 months to get to that definition. It was nuts. And then you have to measure it after that. But, and actually the other thing you had asked is, does it help that we're not in the industry? And absolutely, yes. It has been a benefit to our research coming in from the outside these wellness sectors to do the research, because we don't have preconceived biases about what we think it should be, or it should be defined this way. We look at it in the most unbiased way we can as economists, and we try to look at it very much from a consumer-driven perspective about what do consumers think these things are. And that was important from the very first project we did when we started with the spa data in 2008. Susie said, well, this might be kind of hard because nobody can agree what a spa is. And literally, we just was like trial by fire, like, oh no, we're going to talk to all these people and they're going to tell us it's this, it's that, and so if you're in Europe, everybody thought the spas had to have water-based treatments.
Right.
And, I think there was another definition where there were, 5 different types of offerings and you had to have at least 3 of them and check the boxes. And, we went through all of that. And again, it was like a 6-month process of defining it, but we had the freedom as people from outside the industry to say, okay, we're going to hear all of this. And then we're going to come in as economists and say, look, your consumers don't care whether you meet the strict definition of a spa or not. It's really, at the end of the day, if they think they're going to a spa, it's probably, we can call it a spa. So, not quite that loose, but, we tried to push them toward thinking about a very more accommodating and sort of flexible definition about what a spa is from a consumer mindset. Because as we know, the industry in the last 15 years has just proliferated in terms of the types of offerings and, establishments that are full service spas versus, maybe just offering, massage and nothing else. And, that's, you don't want to be restrictive because it prevents the industry from growing and, flourishing and meeting what consumers are looking for. So.
Well, and to your point, I mean, there was a time when we did, especially in the US, struggle with what defines a spa. Solus per aquam. Do they have to have a water feature? Now, and everyone thought, oh, you have to have a water feature, but there's no spa police going around checking to see if you did or didn't before you put the name spa on your sign outside, right? So, it's completely self-regulated as it is.
Mm-hmm.
Respect, like Katherine said, is really, you want to respect the consumers, right? Like if I feel like I'm going to a spa, it is a spa. You cannot tell me it's not, right?
No, I love that designation. Okay, the consumer thinks it is, then it is, because you're right. It should be driven by the consumer. So that first report in 2008, was there more than, was it just defining spa? I forget what other sectors were involved at that point.
Just spa.
Just spa. Yeah.
Just spa. And so how did we get to where we are today with our beautiful bubble chart with 6 or 7 sectors that you guys define, and then a few others that you get your numbers from elsewhere? Like, can you talk a little bit about how that evolution happened?
Yeah, I can talk to that because that was actually mainly me for a couple of years. What happened is, that spa report came out, and as we said, there was the recession, and I think they continued the spa summit, but there wasn't any funding for research. And around, I think it was 2010, things were starting to pick back up, and Susie really wanted to have another, study to present at the summit that year. And people in the spa world have been talking about wellness as being an important sort of trend and driving factor for them, and we're very interested in it. And there was a lot of lack of clarity on what it was and what it meant. And so in 2010, she asked, we were working at SRI still at the time. It was a consulting project for us. She asked us to do a project to talk about wellness in the spa context. So we did a report, and she had such a small budget for that year. The report was basically me doing it alone. And we did a report on, spas and the global wellness industry, or I forget what we called it, but it was basically the first exploratory research that we did on, okay, what is this wellness thing? Where did it come from? What's the background? And what does this mean for spas? Is it an opportunity? And if it is, what are the ways that, these businesses can be thinking about it? And so it was a really interesting research project because, again, no one had really done research on wellness as a concept at that point. And so I just sort of picked it up and started digging, and, we ended up looking back at the long history over time. There's a big detailed timeline in there that sort of pieces together, from Ayurveda and TCM.
Right, from 5,000 years ago. Exactly.
Yeah, it was really, I learned a lot that project because I didn't know about any of those things. And then, we looked around at what business type research had been done on it. There was none except for one book that had been done in 2001. And then we even, just looking at the concept of wellness, we learned a lot about, there were a set of sort of wellness pioneers in the 60s and 70s that had picked up, Halbert Dunn was the first to, in the modern era, define wellness. And then there were a few doctors and people sort of hippie type granola doctors who picked up the concept and were running wellness clinics. I actually managed to talk to a couple of them during that project, which was really interesting. So like Jack Travis was one of the lead people involved, and he's in Australia now.
And Don Ardell, I'm sure.
Yeah. So, that was the first, contact we even had with them through GWS. And so I presented that research in Istanbul, I guess, in 2010. And, it was, people were really excited to hear it because, again, nobody had really put all the information about wellness together in that way. The first iteration of the bubble chart was actually in that report. It was something, I think Ophelia helped me, even though she wasn't really working on the project. We were trying to just come up with an idea of, well, if this is an industry, what might be in it? And we did a very rough, you can go back and look at it. There's a very rough chart in there that has most of the sectors that we still cover now. It's changed. And I put some very rough numbers on it, literally just drawing what I could from secondary sources. And so that was the first time we put that idea on paper. So we had that, and then I guess the next year, then we did wellness tourism because, the summit and was so interested in that as being a really important trend and growing and wanted to define it. And then after that was when we did the first wellness economy report, because we realized, okay, it's a couple of years have passed since I did that first spa and wellness study. It's grown even more. We know this is an industry. We can define it now. And so we did just refinements on the sectors. And at that point, we had done original data that we put together for wellness tourism. And then I think Susie asked us to put together data for springs, the thermal springs industry, because they're very big and active stakeholders in GWS at the time. And then we had the spa data. So we had 3 data streams that were ours that we had measured for all countries, and the rest of the sectors we were pulling just global numbers from secondary sources. So, and what's happened since then is now we fill in those other sectors with our own original data.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Katherine, for elaborating on that. What sort of secondary sectors do you look to?
Well, I can answer it since I'm the main data person. Or Ophelia, do you want to? Oh, she's breaking up again.
Oh, you go.
Okay, I'll just jump. Hopefully she'll come back in a few minutes. Okay, we'll pause so you can edit and then I'll start again. Okay, so the secondary sources are very diverse. Having a background as an economist and having worked in consulting projects on a lot of industries, I know pretty much any source that's out there at the international level and national level on where you can get industry data and business data. Some sectors have more data than others that you can get from government sources. For example, in tourism, there are a couple of, the UNWTO and also the World Travel and Tourism Council, they collect data for every country on tourism, that exists. But then when you get into things like, some of our other sectors, like we did physical activity a couple of years ago, there's no one gathering physical activity data as a business activity. You have to look to other things. So it's very much a part art, part science. We go to the sources that we know exist that might approximate what we need, and then we use other parameters to make a sort of an economic model where we can redefine it and then measure it in the way that we want to measure it and talk about it. Every sector that we do is completely different and has a different set of data streams. We do subscribe to Euromonitor, which is a private data provider that has massive databases for certain industries. So some of our sectors, we draw a lot of data from them, like healthy eating. That's one that they do a really good job of defining different subsegments within that market. And so for that particular sector, we piece together a lot of different pieces, mainly from them. Whereas other sectors like mental wellness, it's just, we start from the ground up and we have to, do our best to figure out a way to measure it. So I don't know, that's what we've always been good at. So
that makes sense, Katherine, given that you're economists, you know where to look for these things, whereas the average consumer or person like myself, I don't know. I mean, I see reports from data tracking services or Statista, but I don't have access or subscription to broader sets of data, which is why we have.
Yeah, it's like Catherine said, it is part art, part science. And they're industry that collect data and had very concrete data through, like government statistical agencies, right? When you look at, say, auto industry, there are which ones, the sales of their vehicles or, countries, they're kind of tracked in their national services. And then there's products, one source for those things. And so the big challenge for us is it's also, when we're looking across 220 countries, you need a uniform way to like compare them, right? Like you can't just take one source from this country and another source from another country and they differently. You can't just take it. So when you multiply by 11 sectors, I mean, you can imagine the kind of craziness, right? I mean, 220 countries, 11 sectors. And what is the source? And then each one had subsectors. So some of them are top down, as we say. Like tourism is really more top down because there's data on sort of total trips and the spending on trips that tourism agencies track, right? So we have to estimate the portion that we would consider as wellness. So that's how we track something tourism. But for something like spa, we are going from bottom up because we keep our own database of what the number of spas in each country and the kind of spas, and we kind of put a estimate on their revenue on each kind of spa in each country, and we add them up and we multiply. You do not want to see out Excel spreadsheets. So it is a lot of it is based on assumptions, like what data we can get, and then we have to make assumptions and extrapolate and estimate for all the missing bits, right? So you do have to stick your neck out there, because if this is not a census, we did not send a survey to every business considered wellness.
You didn't? Oh.
So, right. And so this is the best we could do, but as economists, and it's all about assumptions, you make the best assumptions you can, and get as much data in all languages we can find and every country we can find. And then we fill in the missing bits. That's the best we could do.
Well, I think it really all came to life to me when, I guess it was in Austria, in Innsbruck, when we first did the bubbles on stage and everybody came on with their different size bubble. And you're like, oh, and because we were all from different sectors, I come from spa, and it was really good to see, where you are in sort of the greater universe of wellness, where you stand. I love that idea.
Yeah, that presentation was so popular, and when Nancy first had the idea, we were like, oh no, this is gonna be so cheesy, but somehow it worked.
No, it worked really well. Yeah. And now, of course, everyone's obsessed with the bubble chart. Those of you listening who haven't seen it can easily find it on the Global Wellness Institute's website. Or actually, I guess, does it live on the Summit's website, the research?
On the Institute website.
On the Institute website.
Whole section of the website.
So, we were eagerly awaiting the numbers last fall at the summit in Boston to hear how we fared through the COVID years, as we'll call them. And it was, again, super helpful to see the data that you two put together on that, and where we stood on what these 11 or 12 sectors. Wellness tourism, of course, and spas and thermal springs took the biggest hits of almost 40% each in their revenue. So we had big hits. That's a sizable hit. But going forward, the numbers look good. And some sectors did well. Wellness real estate was up. Mental wellness was up. Healthy eating and nutrition was up. And so other sectors were just right around break even. So are you feeling like, okay, we're through with COVID, or what's your economist viewpoint on that?
I wish.
David.
Don't we all wish? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not through with COVID, obviously. I mean, I think it's clear that people are tired of the shutdowns and restrictions. So in most countries, not all, that's gone, and people are doing what they want to do, what they feel safe doing, and traveling. And, there's all the pent up demand as the
Mhm.
world opened up again. I mean, I would say that, when we made our predictions in that report, that was the end of last summer, I would say if we were making the predictions now, they might be a little bit less optimistic, just
Mhm.
because you look at what's happened in the last year. I mean, we were predicting at the end of the summer, before the fall sort of Delta and Omicron and the whole,
Mhm.
next wave of things happened. And then of course with the
War in
geopolitical events
Russia.
and, Russia, Ukraine, all of that, things have shifted, and, with inflation and everything that's happening now. I mean, projections are projections. They're the best guess you can make with the information that you have available to you at the time.
Mhm.
We base our projections on IMF and a bunch of global agencies that project these things. But yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any question that as a long-term trend, the outlook for wellness in all sectors related to wellness is quite robust.
Mhm.
So I think it's a question of timing and, things that are outside of the control of people in the industry and us. And so.
When we're looking at the global wellness industry, of course, it is just part of the global economy. And right now, the outlook is not that optimistic, right? Like, we have
Mhm.
war, supply chain issues, we have inflation, and then we have these sort of geopolitical situation where just there's a lot of tension. So when we're looking at different bits of the wellness industry, we know that during the pandemic, the services, when people cannot get services, they kind of substituted with goods, with products, right? And
Mhm.
so
Right.
when like we don't, first there is Omicron, or whatever variation of COVID, and we don't know about how consumers feel and governments and the movement of people and all that. So that's definitely going to continue to affect all the services, spa, tourism, springs, obviously. And then we have the other situation of really, there are people in the world that we were, before we're predicting the growing global middle class, and people are just, now they don't have to worry about their food and shelter. They're really starting to care about their quality of life, and more spending on wellness related stuff, right? But now we're kind of seeing an alarming trend. I mean, we're talking about starvation now. We're not, not talking about supplements. We're talking people starving.
Mm.
And so, I mean, it's kind of weird for us to talk about the 4 trillion dollar market, but they're from a business economy perspective, we're maybe talking about not growing middle class, and people are starting to worry about their livelihood. So their discretionary purchases of things will be affected, right? Like, if you don't have a lot of money for food, you may not be buying that skincare product, right? I mean, these are
Right.
like really more discretionary items. But at the same time, we had a very bifurcated kind of income and wealth situation. There are people who just have more and more and more money, and they're spending on the super expensive elite things. So and that's why, and that's what's also bringing wellness a bad name, right, in the press, that just making fun of these people, spending money on these things, and then you have people who don't have basic necessities. So we're looking at a pretty volatile situation on both, right, both spending category. But I think on the overall, when you look at in any kind of situation, if people are beyond the sort of, the subsistence level, that they're not just completely just worried about having enough food and not becoming homeless, any extra money, their orientation and their value system of, how they're going to spend that money is going to be on their health. That is not going to change. That's only going to be that's only going to be like more and more going forward. So the pie of wellness will grow whatever the pie is. This is the short,
I was thinking that when you said discretionary spending, I know there's an economist definition of that. We have to have food and shelter, but discretionary spending, that definition is also broad, and for different people, it may mean different things. And one person's discretionary may be another person's necessary when it comes to their health and wellness, right?
Yeah,
yes,
for sure.
Yeah. So like, for example, some people, you think of medicine as not discretionary, right?
Right.
But people are foregoing the medication, right? They're splitting up their pills and when they don't have money. But are we substituting medication with getting a massage or going to someone cryotherapy chamber? I think there are people who start to do that. They think that might be, what will help them with their chronic problems more than expensive medication. I mean, there's going to be more of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, the message that we've been trying, I mean, even before COVID, a message that we've been really trying to push with the industry is, let's keep in mind there's wellness as a business opportunity, right? The industry that we measure that, people can make a lot of money on, but there's wellness as a concept and a need that does not necessarily require expenditure. And so we don't want to have the business thinking sort of overtake the broader need for people to have access to, essentials for their health, that should not require using all their discretionary income. So I think there's really a push and pull and sort of a conversation there that, is challenging in the industry about, what's happening, and the industry is important and valid and good because they're really pushing it forward and pushing boundaries and exploring things that were considered fringe before, and that's how opportunities grow, and different types of treatments and wellness practices become mainstream, and that needs to continue happening. But at the same time, we need a parallel movement of investments that are not at the most exclusive high end, and making sure that other people can access these things.
It seems to me, Katherine, that a good example of what you just said was when you released the physical activity numbers in Singapore. I guess that was in 2019, and the market had grown exponentially, but also because things were added to it that weren't being counted before. And of course, there are gym memberships and buying clothes at Lululemon, but there's also things people do on their own, to your point, that I don't need sort of a subscription to, but I might spend the money in a different way.
Yeah, definitely. And that was a sector, that sector has probably changed the most in the last 10 years, because, initially when people think wellness, they think fitness, going to the gym, and all the things you buy to support that. So when we launched that year-long study, we were still thinking of it that way. And there was another one where we spent like 6 months amongst the three of us on the research team debating, well, should we include sports? Should we not include sports? What about dance? What about martial arts? And, once we started thinking about it as, what is important for wellness and physical activity, it's to move, right? Like the WHO doesn't say what type of movement you need to do. They don't say do Peloton or go to the gym. They say you need to move, at a certain sort of cardiovascular level, a certain number of minutes per week. You can do that in any way you want to. So, it reminded us, again, that inclusive definition. And, if you want people to be active, they should need to do what they enjoy. And that may be dancing. That might be running in the park. For kids, it's often sports. And so that's how we landed on that much expanded bubble and sector, is that we thought it was very important to recognize that all of those activities are important and valid when our goal is, physical activity and movement for wellness. So.
No, I agreed. I thought that was brilliant, the way that was all encapsulated, because you're right. It's a way you're moving, in whatever way that is, whether walking down your street or through money you pay through a subscription, and it should count.
Yeah.
So coming from the spa world, of course, I look at the little spa bubble, and it's maybe the third smallest bubble on the chart. But when I show this chart to people in my sector, I say, what this says to me is opportunity, right? Look at all the money that's being spent, and look how much more we could be taking, if we if we changed what we did. And now we are seeing so many sort of changes and additions to wellness. So I'd like to hear from you both about going forward, how do you start to record, as Ophelia, you mentioned cryotherapy, breath work, and these new modalities, sound healing. I mean, how will we keep track of this as they evolve?
Yeah, as you said, spa is one of the smaller bubbles, and it was our first original bubble. So, and it had a very special place in the wellness economy, despite its size, because when you think about maybe not all 11 of them, but when you think about physical activity, integrative medicine, and traditional complementary medicine, and a lot of the mental wellness modalities, not to mention like the just the sort of what do you think of the spa therapies, a lot of these were introduced to people at spas, right? And even though the spas may not capture the revenue later on, a lot of people got, that's where they try new things, and then they got interested. And so that's where it originated for a lot of people. So, and you're right, when we have cryotherapy, we have like salt caves, we have gong baths, and these have become sort of separate businesses. They're like dedicated space and business just to do that. Now, what sector are they in? We have talked about those. We're not sure. And then we have these places, when you look at wellness real estate, a lot of different brands are setting up their sort of wellness clubs, which is kind of, social entertainment. And then, but they're also, have IV drips. They could have some classes and lectures. And what are those? What do we call those? They're like social space, and could be membership, could be very exclusive, could be, or could be more, accessible cost-wise, but what do we call those, right? I mean, they definitely do not fit the definition of just spa where you get right. And then there is some sort of real estate space where they try to integrate all kinds of wellness related services. They may have doctors there, but then they also may have their chiropractor. They will have maybe meditation class, or they could counseling on nutrition. And what do you call those space? We don't know. They're definitely in the wellness industry, right? Are they in the medical space, but are they really just in the real estate space? We don't think so, because that's not building, it's operating, right?
Right.
A lot of these emerging business models, and what's, of course, when we are trying to measure each one and the size of the bubble, it gets a little challenging because they're all morphing. But then it goes back to the value of the bubble chart. We have been linking them together, and the people in their discrete businesses have been seeing themselves being linked. And I think that's why this is all happening, right? So we'll still be struggling of how to define the spa bubble, but I think the spa industry is a big beneficiary of this too.
Yeah, and actually it also, I mean, one of the interesting things about the measurements we do is, as an economist, there are different ways of measuring things. The measurement can be place-based or business-based, and that's the approach that we've used with the spa industry, starting in 2008. A spa is a discrete location, right? It's a business, it's physical, you go to it and you experience or do certain things. The interesting, and like a thermal spring, same thing. You have to have a physical location to go to a thermal springs. And so we measure business revenues because that's our way of capturing the economic activity related to those. Other sectors are different, but with the interesting change with the spa industry, like you said, with the morphing of, well, you can get these services here and there, and maybe they're embedded in your, club at your real estate development. It may be at some point in the future that business or place-based measurement of spa no longer even works. Because you can no longer contain it to, this is the physical place, this is what it is.
Right.
So, I don't know at what point that might happen, but it's certainly happening in the marketplace. So.
I think the best illustration of that is when you look at the hotel sector and you think about spa. And I always said, okay, is it a place with a door we can lock? Does that contain the spa?
Yeah.
And it always did, right? And now we're starting to not see that as much. And the spa is yeah, there's still a place where you go to have treatments, but in hospitality, they're really trying to infuse wellness throughout the property and have other experiences, perhaps by the pool, where someone comes to your room. And so, yes, this becomes more difficult to measure for sure. I'm thinking of an earlier guest that I had on a podcast who is a physical therapist who owns a facility, I'll call it, with her primary care physician husband. And he sees patients for primary care. And her side, they do yoga and lactation counseling and behavioral health and massages and facials. It's like, that's so cool, but what is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
some kind of wellness facility.
Don't need a name, but then as a consumer, sometimes I'm confused too when things are marketed to me, like all these, now I'm in an age where I get places where, it's for menopausal women, it's like, what kind of space is this? Is it like a medical space, or is it like a club? And, or what did you do there? Like, they claim to do all these things, and then they have all kinds of therapies or treatment or modalities. And it's very confusing too, right? To consumers.
No,
Sometimes.
I agree. I think the definition of spa is now like, what does it mean anymore? I don't know that the word's going to go away, but it doesn't mean what it used to mean. And I don't know if we'll get a different word or you guys will invent a new sector. What do you see happening as these bubbles continue to clone and merge? What are you seeing in the future?
That's a good question. I mean, the biggest shift we've made recently, obviously, was adding mental wellness, which, the idea of that, kind of like wellness way back, it was growing for a long time. And we kept saying, well, I don't know that there's an industry that we can measure yet. And finally, 2 years ago, we're like, okay, yes, now it's time. There's actual businesses and economic activities that we can define and put under the heading of mental wellness. So that was, the sort of biggest shift we've had so far in saying, okay, here's a sector that has become a sector. Looking forward, I can't see us adding anything new, to the bubble chart in the near future off the top of my head. I think the biggest possibility is maybe some shifts or merging of, some of those bubbles if it becomes to the point where it makes sense, maybe, spa and springs I would say spa, springs, and the traditional and complementary medicine bubbles are the three sectors where a lot of that morphing and overlapping and spin-off opportunities and connections are happening. So maybe those will change in the future. I don't know. It's hard to say. We do know that there are a lot of small niche activities that, our numbers try to capture those, but not necessarily in a very specific way. So I would say some of the things like IV drips and cryotherapy, I mean, the size of those activities in economic terms is so small that whether or not they're in there or not makes no difference on that 4.4 trillion number, right? Like it's so tiny, it's like a rounding error, that you wouldn't even see. I think those conceptually are included in our traditional and complementary medicine bubble in a loose sense. Those types of activities would go there. That's not a sector we've actually fleshed out and done all of our own numbers with. So that one could change if we do it eventually.
Sure.
Healthy eating too is another sector where we have a big number, but we have not done a deep dive on that bubble, which I think is likely to happen in the next few years. So
I went to the Natural Products Expo last fall and they had really interesting numbers on that market and healthy eating. And, it's booming by their account anyway. Of course, it's in their benefit to say that, but it does seem like across this country anyway, that we're making efforts to be more intelligent about what we eat. So maybe we'll see.
Healthy eating is a really problematic sector for us. So at whatever point we do a full report on it, will be interesting to see where we go with it, because the things that we measure and the things that are being talked about at those conferences and by those business associations are typically packaged products. They're processed, they're supplements, they're things that fortified, they have superfood all added. yes, there are a lot of healthy things being sold, and there are a lot of things like that being sold that, is this necessary for a healthy
Right.
diet?
You've
Like,
got the
no.
whole functional beverage market,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, I don't think that there's any rigorous scientific medical, evidence behind those products as being necessary for people. Like, help some people, some not. I don't know. I'm not I'm not a researcher on that particularly, but we look at it with a lot of skepticism because we have to. And at the same time, if you look at the recommendations for a healthy diet, we need to be eating, probably less meat, less processed foods, more produce, more whole grains. We're not even measuring that in the bubble, because once we add those in, we're basically measuring the whole food industry. And then it becomes,
that's a whole nother study.
right? So this is a whole topic that we're going to need to tackle at some point. I mean, we put those caveats on that sector every time we talk about it, because we think it's important for people to keep in mind that what we measure as healthy eating is what's being marketed in the consumer marketplace as healthy and advertised. And that does not necessarily mean it's, this is what the WHO says, people need to do.
That's a great distinction.
So.
Ophelia, do you have any thoughts on what you see, how this bubble chart may merge or morph in the next few years?
Like Katherine said, I mean, there are two things have been talked about. One is technology that's so pervasive in everything. And there's often people ask us, how big is the tech piece? Because, now like metaverse, everybody's talk about the metaverse, but it's so embedded in everything. And so once you get into the technology category, like, how do you separate the science and the technology first, right? Where is the line? And then when we talk about platforms, are we just, are we talking about the content and the cost of that content? Are we like, how do we look at Hollywood and Netflix and all the content generators, and all the music? So, you can't really separate those things when you start going into tech and the streaming and the, and different things. And so there are some concepts and things that spending, investment that are very important in the industry, but it's, it's not easy to capture or have a good way to think about it. And we like to be able to think through these things very carefully and clearly. So like technology is one that is, it has been, a challenge, and it's been suggested to us a number of times. And then some other categories that have been floating around that when you see, like when the Global Wellness Summit published the trends, right? We have things like sexual wellness, financial wellness, and then there are all kinds of wellness. And, it's like sexual wellness, will we add that as a bubble? I don't know. I mean, how big is that? And is it separate or part of, some other bubbles?
Physical activity, maybe.
Yeah,
or TCM.
Yeah. Reproductive health, right? I mean, those are actually health sector, right? When you get to fertility. So, it's like, if it's not easy to separate, we can't do it. And then when you get to like financial wellness or occupational wellness, people talk about all these other things, right? I mean, financial wellness to us is definitely not part of this, right? I mean, that those are other steps. So there are always these things floating around, and we acknowledge that this bubble chart may morph, but for the time being, I think it will stay with the 11.
Okay. Well, in closing, I'd just like to ask you both about the impact of this data. I mean, I think it's monumental, but from your economist point of view, what is the impact of having actual data in these sectors on the industry itself?
So we have been, we do this data, and we don't, it's not like we go and interact with a lot of people who use it, but when we go to events and presentations, we have so many people. Bubble chart and all these data is in their pitch deck every single time. They need some concrete information when they're trying to put their products, their business proposal in front of investors or in front of partners. Where is the position in this in this universe, in this growing market, and that provides a context, a bigger context of where they are, innovating. So that is that's what I found.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, clearly the numbers are being used, and there was a need for them 10 or 15 years ago. And I think that, it's been really important that GWI has been able to fulfill that for the industry. And actually the interesting thing, this is an impact, is, this is the only industry that I know of that has compiled its own data globally on a sustained basis. It's very, very unusual for people within an industry, and especially an industry this broad, to be able to collaborate and support this type of effort and this type of organization and see the value of it. And, they're all business competitors, but
True.
they come to the event and they support the Institute because they recognize the need and the value of, that type of collaboration and supporting the industry with the research and data that they need. So it's really, really unique that has happened in the wellness sector. And it's great. The sustainability people have not done that. There's no data on sustainability and green type stuff because governments don't measure it, and the industry has not come together in the same way to put together their own numbers. So it's, kudos to everyone in the industry
for
doing
sure.
this.
That's a great observation, Katherine, because I'm happy to work in an industry, wellness, where we would rather collaborate and have the story told, right? Than sort of worrying about climbing all over each other to get ahead.
Yeah, it's really exciting. Someone should do like a Harvard Business School case study or something on this industry because it's very unique. In our background as economists, we did industry cluster research, which is studying, the way industries collaborate either at a local level or more broadly to help themselves grow. But this is very unusual, this type of organization and, to be happening at that level. So, and, the impact of the numbers is that wellness was not an industry until we said it was. Nobody, it was a trend. It was something that was,
True.
consumer interests, but until you put numbers on it and a definition on it, it's not recognized as being a legitimate business sector. And so that's really what the research has done for the industry is, given it the attention and the recognition. And once people see the numbers and that this is a sector, they see those opportunities and ways of cross collaborating. So
what can we look forward to in the near future in terms of research?
Right now, what we're working on is a wellness policy report, which is going to be gigantic. It's sort of expanding every day. First, this is the first study in the last 10 years that we have not focused on number and a wellness sector. And it's because the mission of GWI is really powering wellness for all, right? And so in doing our work, we have recognized that as big as the wellness industry is, 4.4 trillion, it is not addressing what people need to live a healthy life. First, not everybody has the money. And second, a lot of the wellness practices, lifestyle does not require money, but people really need to be supported in an environment and just live a life that they're healthy. And so this is the domain of governments to make the investments in the infrastructure, and because the government laid down all the rules, where you build what, and what gets investment, and human resource, and land, and facilities. So, and then a lot of government investments actually filter down to the private sector, right? Like in health industry too. Like government spending, but it's really, right, it becomes, private business or private individuals who would fulfill those, right, those needs for people.
Katherine?
I think we lost Ophelia a little bit.
So so we want to focus on wellness policy and the role that governments can play, and also really, bridge together, right? Mark it down, and then also identify the role. Hello.
We're here.
Hello.
We're here.
You're fine now.
hear me?
You were garbled before.
Oh, where did I stop? You want to continue?
Do we want to go back and?
Yes. Why don't you go back and just say about the role of policy in people's lives?
Okay. Do you want me to try it, or do you want Ophelia to try again? Or
You try, Catherine, in case I'm
Okay.
cut off.
Okay. So the research we're tackling this year is on wellness policy. And this is another kind of immense, monumental study for us because no one has before defined what wellness policy is. So we're putting a definition on it, and then we'll be diving into specific, even, creating toolkits for specific policy needs and opportunities across different segments. And, I think that the reason the time was right for this is probably because of COVID, that, we look back during the shutdowns in 2020, and, there are a lot of people within different types of wellness sectors and businesses saying, hey, look, we shouldn't be shut down. We're important. We're providing health services for people, especially in the gym and fitness sector. In a time of a pandemic, people need to be able to maintain the things that they're doing in order to maintain their health. And so I think people started recognizing that, like, hey, we need to figure out how to interact with governments and how to represent the importance of what the private sector brings to the world and to preventive health. And so that, they can be, lobbied to government, be supported by governments, and be partners. And because the reality is there's a huge portion of the world's population who is not being served by the wellness industry. One question everyone asks is, okay, if we're spending more and more money every year, 4.4 trillion, it keeps going up. Why aren't people healthier? Because the health stats in most places keep going down. And so, I don't know anybody can answer that question definitively, but clearly people are not getting the things they need and don't have access to the lifestyle and the activities they need in order to maintain their health and prevent preventable disease. So that's where the policy piece comes in, is that the government provides the infrastructure and the supportive environments and the support to individuals and even to the business community in order to expand access for all of those things. And so this is a policy and government oriented study, but it's also about partnership opportunities and what the private sector role is in working with the government to expand access to wellness.
That's a great description, Catherine. Thank you for that and for that work, and for being brave enough to look at the root cause, right? I mean, it's very nice to trumpet our numbers, but not everyone could look back and say, well, if we're doing all this great business, why isn't the result what we want? So I applaud you for picking up the blanket and looking underneath, and we look forward to that report. Thank you both again for your time and your tireless and continued contributions on behalf of the wellness industry to further define us and give us the tools we need to grow. We really appreciate all the work that you do and your time today, Catherine and Ophelia, who had a little technical trouble, but we were glad to hear her when we did. Thanks again.
Thank you.